All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at CQ Advocacy for developing your Congressional Scorecards. I'm Anne Dermody. I'm the Content Marketing Director here at CQ for Advocacy and Government Relations. And delighted you could have us along today. And obviously, Congressional Scorecards are going to be big business coming up to the midterms. And we had some primaries last night. So I think things are definitely going to head up in that area. So just to refresh, CQ Advocacy, obviously we've got 5 products: CQ Ignite, CQ Engage, CQ Knowledges, CQ Advocate Acquisition, and CQ Converge. And I'm not going to go into them in too much detail today, except to say that CQ Engage and one that's not on the screen, which is our CQ Federal Suite, allow you to create those great congressional scorecards. And to that end, I'm delighted to have 3 great panelists today. We have Joshua Habursky. Joshua is the Director of Advocacy at the Independent Community Bankers of America and the Chairman of the Grassroots Professional Network. We've also got Alex Terrell. Delighted to have Alex along today. Also delighted to have Josh, obviously, but Josh is kind of an old friend here. So Alex, this is his first time joining us, and he is the Deputy Legislative Director at the League of Conservation Voters, and he uses legislative strategy, executive branch advocacy, communications, and electoral politics to advance the organization's federal policy agenda. And the League of Conservation Voters do a terrific job with their scorecards, and Alex is going to walk us through kind of the process of how they do that and why they do that. And then finally, we'll be joined by Mark Iscario. Mark is our Senior CQ Customer Education Manager, and he leads clients to better use and understand CQ's solutions and services. And Mark's been with us since 2003, so there isn't anything he doesn't know about all of our solutions and services. So to that end, let's kick it off, and I think we're going to go with Josh first. So take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I'm going to just go over some of the basics with scorecards, and then I'll give Alex the floor to kind of talk some in-depth and a case study of the League of Conservation Voters. So we'll talk a little bit about pros and cons of congressional scorecards, leveraging it effectively, and the essentials in a quick overview. So I think first and foremost, with a congressional scorecard, it provides a layer of accountability for the members of Congress to the organization itself. Obviously, your organization is trying to get your legislative priorities or regulatory priorities in front of the right people. And, you know, having the scorecard puts them on notice and puts them accountable to those set of priorities themselves. So I think it's very beneficial to track the scorecards over a set of time. Not only does it inform members of Congress of their score and their staff, but it also informs your membership of where you stand and where their members of Congress and staff stand within the context of the scorecard. It also will showcase switching positions. Is your federal lobbying team being effective, and are you getting more people Congress to Congress to support legislation that, you know, it comes up more than one time? So you can look at the 114th Congress, compare it to the 115th Congress. Did you win over more people, or did you lose? So it's a good metric and benchmark for, you know, year-to-year growth with your federal affairs team. It'll also showcase some trends. You know, are there certain voting blocks? Can you look and say the House Freedom Caucus is supporting this, you know, set of legislation? So, you know, analyzing that data and having it publicly available, and even providing some commentary on that from your organization's perspective can be great. You know, in the past with the scorecard, I would have written some key talking points, included the scorecard in a newsletter, and also had that publicly available on the site. We use CQ products when I was at the American Motorcyclist Association, which I have a slide coming up, and that was one of the things that we looked at. We also looked at key votes. So, like, you know, obviously, for any large trade association, you're covering many different issue areas. You're covering, in some cases, hundreds of bills. But there's certain ones that are your bread and butter. Those are the most important, your key votes. And with that, that will be a large determining factor in your overall congressional scorecard. So I think it's important to let the members of Congress and staff know that it is, in fact, a key vote. It's going to affect their congressional scorecard and their overall score. So being transparent is another major factor, and this is just an example of the Heritage Action, key votes that provide guidance on Capitol Hill of the conservative movement. And, there's examples of scorecards on both sides, progressive as well as conservative, and, small nonprofits to trade associations are using these tools effectively, whether it be key votes or the overall scorecard. So I think it's important to look at the essentials, be proactive in informing Capitol Hill of what factors into a key vote or scorecard. There are essentials. Transparency is key in that. You have to have a sense of objectivity. If the Hill questions the objectivity or the transparency of the scorecard, the usefulness is lost. And I think that some groups that have produced scorecards, that has been their pitfall, that it isn't a transparent process of what goes into the scorecard, and it's not seen as objective. Interactive design and easy to search. You should be able to find your member of Congress. If I'm a member of an association and I want to know where my House member sits on it or where my 2 senators, you need to be able to find that information quickly. You shouldn't have to scroll and search and process things that are multifaceted or complicated. The other thing that is critically important is frequently updating this. So some of it may involve processing information from a database, using your creative assets and customizing. You have to determine a process where the frequency is in the quality of the scorecard itself is considered on a routine basis. So having that quality control, having that information updated frequently will go a long way. If you have votes that have taken place and months later it isn't reflected in the scorecard, you're better not having a scorecard altogether, because that isn't a useful tool on your site. Or take it down, put under construction, because this information does need to be fresh and accurate. And this is just an example of what we did with the American Motorcyclists Association, and I was there almost 4 years ago. And this is the template that we used back then. We love to highlight 3 of our champions and have our members have the ability to interact with them on social media. So that was a custom thing. We took the data from CQ, we processed it, we had our legislation that we were tracking. That was on display, short introduction, and then the 3 featured ones there. So very simple. But you could, find our legislative scorecard, and it was a tool that was utilized by membership. There are some risks of utilizing this scorecard. Really, the middle isn't a good place to be. If you have somebody that supports 50% of your legislation and doesn't, they're still a champion in some sense of it from a overall federal policy perspective, but they might be opposed to certain things. So that is a challenge and a pitfall with any scorecard. Alienating moderates and issue-to-issue members of Congress. So, like, if people are looking at it and they're not 100% on your issues, but they are with you some of the time, you could, with their low score or moderate score even, you could irritate them to an extent. Alienating your membership as well. Statistics and polling and data have said that, individually, people like their members of Congress. They don't like Congress as a whole. But if you have a low score with somebody and it's your key contact in your database who is friends, they golf with a member of Congress, you're leveraging them to meet and interact with them, but they only have a 50% score on your scorecard, that's a challenge that presents itself. Organizational and reputational risk. I mentioned transparency. and objectivity. If your scorecard is not transparent or objective, that will affect the overall reputation of the organization itself, beyond even government relations. Controversies with individual members of Congress. Some members of Congress will look at the scorecard and be like, I'm low on this. I'm going to write to this organization and complain. And there are examples, you can look at it in the media, of members of Congress going after organizations for their scorecards. So that is a risk. Lo and behold, we're talking about scorecards as a whole, and there are, and I'll mention in the next slide, a lot of things that make it useful to have a scorecard, and a lot of people believe that these risks are not outweighed by the positive gains from it. So the benefits of a scorecard, as I mentioned, it holds members of Congress accountable on industry issues. It informs membership, the media, and the public on a curated voting record. It sets the tone for the relationship with a congressional office. And it also has that carrots and stick approach. So you're rewarding members of Congress that support your issues by displaying them and their name and their voting record. But it also is the stick approach. If you're 10% and you're a powerful trade association and you're showcasing that person's name, they may be swayed to look and reconsider some of the issues in recognizing that your organization represents a voting bloc and a large group of constituents. Highlights supporters and identifies coalitions and to bring new allies. I mentioned it's a risk, and it might not always great to be in the 50th percentile, but starting that dialogue and meeting more frequently with that 50 percentile and saying, hey, you're with us on these issues, can you, are you interested in learning more about this other set of issues? So it's a nice segue to say, hey, we really are supportive of what you're doing on this front. How can we get to yes on this other front? It's also a member benefit. It's an informative piece. It's a tool for your membership that they can use and they can see. A lot of times, and if the frequency is not updated routinely, your members will tell you. They are looking at this because it's a tool that you can be engaged with. And it also can be communicated through multiple vehicles and is evergreen. So if there is a lull, and it seems this Congress there's no lull, if you have a lull in July or August and you need some content to get in front of your membership, showcase the scorecard. Say, in your in-district meetings in August, take a look at the scorecard, reference the legislation that they've supported, that they haven't supported, and communicate it through email, through social media. I showcased the example of having our members have the ability to interact with certain members that are champions on social media, but use your organizational channels to say, hey, thank you, Senator X, for being a cause champion and receiving a 98% score. And you can get creative with that. I know that a lot of education themes, even if you're not in that, but it's like school. You're getting a 98% score on the test, and there's some ways to get creative and work with your marketing and communications team on stuff like that. So I'm going to now turn it over to Alex for a case study.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh, and thanks everybody for having me on here. So there you have a couple of examples here of the National Environmental Scorecard, our cover of our printed version, still producing those. So what is the National Environmental Scorecard? Well, by a lot of folks, it's considered the yardstick used to measure members of Congress's record on environmental policy. We give every member of Congress who votes an annual and a lifetime score ranging from 0 to 100%. We've been doing this virtually every year since 1971, and in the last few years, we've gone into Spanish. This is an example of the printed scorecard and what ours looks like. And so you've got the various 2017, 114 Congress, and lifetime scores, as well as all of the votes that we scored here in 2017. Hopefully, it's pretty easy to read. Martin Heinrich's 95% for 2017. And then his scores the last in the last Congress and his lifetime, and then you can see exactly where he voted with our position and the X mark where he was voting anti-environment. Of course, that's the printed scorecard. Here we have what the online scorecard looks like. We've got every single member of Congress, past and current, has their own dedicated page, so hopefully easy to see their current score, their lifetime score, and then you can look down and see the various votes and where they stood on them. I'm going to direct your attention to the horizontal green bar there that has, towards the right side, the issues. And you can see that the various votes below that have, they're sort of categorized by issue category. At this point, the drop-down menu is set to all, so we're seeing all of the various votes in the scorecard. But as I go to the next screen here, you'll notice that under issues there, it says oceans. And so what we've done there is you can really see the votes that we've scored just on oceans issues. And so there was not a vote in 2017. There was the last oceans vote was in 16, and then 13, 12, et cetera. And why we think this is a useful feature is, of course, you know, your organization or association has multiple issues that you're tracking, and different members of Congress have different, you know, sort of bodies of work and record on various sub-issues. So, for example, here we could see, you know, how Senator Sherrod Brown is voting on oceans issues relative to kind of other environmental issues, and that can be very helpful in targeting which members of Congress to be focusing on various sub-issues that your organization works on. Moving on, here we can also do some sorting by party and by lifetime score. And so here we've got the top scoring Republicans in 2017 sorted by lifetime score. And so that, again, can be very helpful in our targeting when we're looking at who are we looking for allies in one party or another, or, you know, who are the least likely to be with us, and to know where to sort of focus our time and attention. So definitely helpful for me as a lobbyist to have this sorting feature. Methodology of our scorecard. So, you know, we're capturing, in our view, the most consequential environmental votes taken during the year. Other association scorecards are going to capture some more subjective actions, such as whether or not you give a floor speech or sign a letter, or if you have a relationship with the trade association or the organization. We like to keep ours almost exclusively focused on actions that every single member of Congress can take, and so we try to focus on floor votes that everybody. The question is called for every member of Congress who votes. One of the things that Josh was talking about was the transparency of how we score votes and how we signal to the Hill the importance of an issue. So one of the things that we do is we send up what looks like a scorecard letter that threatens to score a vote ahead of time. I think different organizations will guarantee that they're going to be scoring a particular vote. They'll say this vote is getting key voted, it's getting into our scorecard for sure. Our process is different. We say it's highly likely that we'll score it, and I think the Hill has come to understand that a letter like that is a good signal that that vote will be scored, but we don't actually make the decisions, as I'll talk about later, till the end of the year when we've looked back at the full suite of votes and know which ones were really the most important over the course of the year. Other criteria that we're looking at are, you know, of course, Congress oftentimes will vote on big omnibus bills that have environmental implications, but are also much broader. And so a question for us is how much were members of Congress considering the environment when they were voting on that piece of legislation? Did it factor into the floor debate? Some of this stuff gets obviously a little bit subjective. Obviously on environmental policy, people have different views about what a pro-environment position is on an issue. And so we only score votes that, in our view, it's clear what the pro-environment position was. Was it a vote for that bill or a vote against the bill? And if there's some ambiguity, it doesn't go into our scorecard. So those are some of the factors that we take a look at when we decide which votes to score. We don't just make these decisions about which votes to score in isolation. We do it actually with a scorecard advisory committee made up of about 20 different representatives from other major environmental organizations. And so that really allows us to have more expertise about what were the most important votes and which ones had the biggest environmental implications. And it also candidly gets those other organizations bought into our scorecard because they have a hand in it and perhaps won't think about starting their own scorecards. So I'm looking at Anne here, and maybe we want more scorecards out there. So as I said, the decisions to score a vote by that scorecard advisory committee are made at the end of the year rather than in real time. That's how we choose to do it. Obviously, other organizations take a different approach. And then the way that we calculate the score is we take the number of scored pro-environments cast and divide it by the total number of votes scored. That gets you a score of 0 to 100%. Our process here for actually pulling together the scorecard once we've selected the votes, of course I'm on here because we use CQ data to get the vote results, and that spits out some nice looking Excel sheets that then become those scorecard grids that you saw earlier in my presentation. We work with a designer and translator to pull together the scorecard. We also print this up for some select audiences, members of Congress, our supporters, our donors. They love to see this stuff. And then we upload it into the online scorecard. And that process takes us around a month from those decisions being finalized to the public rollout of the scorecard. I'm sure others have different timelines, but it can take us a while, but then we get a lot of benefit from it, as we'll see. So I think a key thing about why we put it out, the scorecard, is it's a really easy to understand tool for the public and the media. You know, members of Congress vote on so many different issues. They're taking positions on so many different things, and to have a numeric score that boils down how people should be assessing their environmental record is a very useful thing for people who aren't in DC and following these issues day to day. And so it becomes a really popular product for our members and other stakeholders. Certainly we're getting a lot of press coverage whenever members of Congress are being written about in their environmental records, and so that sort of builds our brand as well. We are definitely holding accountable members of Congress after the fact for their voting behavior. I think what's perhaps a little less well known is that we're actually influencing their behavior, ahead of time. I'm a lobbyist, and so this is an example of a kind of a conversation that I'm having constantly with offices ahead of votes, where they're asking me if we're gonna plan to put this in our scorecard, and that's gonna factor into the way that their boss will vote. And so we know it's influencing behavior, and of course we're not just a watchdog group, but we are trying to actually advocate and influence the votes, and the scorecard is a real tool for that. So we also recognize that the scorecard, if nobody knows about it, isn't going to have as much influence as if we promote it pretty widely. So we do a good job of making sure certainly that our members see it, and so we push it out on social media, as Josh was saying, email them, we send hard copies to donors, that sort of stuff. It's a really popular thing that our members like. Here we have an example of the kind of media rollout that we pursue. We certainly do a kind of national press rollout, but we also work with our network of state affiliates to promote the scorecard to their local reporters, and so that extends the reach of the scorecard and also holds accountable the members of Congress back in their home state newspapers, which is even more effective at holding them accountable. We certainly let the Hill know about the scorecard, but we also sort of encourage them to tout their own scores. And so here you have an example of Congressman Steny Hoyer celebrating his score on our National Environmental Scorecard. So we were able to get a little bit more kind of reach and just an indication of hopefully the influence of the scorecard that they want to be associated with it. Occasionally we will choose to put out somebody's score in a more robust way and do it directly to the public because we think it's an important thing that the public should know about. So here's an example of a television advertisement that featured former Senator Scott Brown's 0% score from the League of Conservation Voters. We thought that was an interesting fact to highlight, that he had been voting so anti-environment despite living in a very seemingly pro-environment state. So we chose to put a little bit of money behind that. So that's an example of really kind of using the scorecard and putting it out there and making it more effective and holding members of Congress sort of more deeply accountable for their environmental record.
Great, thank you, Alex. Just before we go over to Mark, I did want to mention that if you've got any questions, you can type them in the chat box and we'll hopefully get to them at the end. And also, of course, if you registered for the webinar, you'll be getting a link to the recording and you'll also get an email, so watch out for that in the next day or two. But in the interim, start thinking of those questions and we'll go over to Mark Ascario now.
Thank you, Anne. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Ascario, a customer education manager with CQ. And we're going to show you very briefly an example of what Alex was talking about on how to create scorecards, especially when you're using the CQ Federal system. We've recently updated our site and therefore the available reports. So if we get started, we'll go to Create on our CQ page and Report. From there, we'll select specifically the Vote Scorecard Report. And your first options will be to add the votes that you're interested in viewing. So you can either add the votes by directly typing in the vote number or the bill that's associated with it, or you can add by actually searching for specific bills, either by number or by topic or keyword. Or if you've saved them to a project folder within the new CQ platform, you'll be able to add them directly from the projects where you've stored those votes. You'll also notice that on the right, you have your position box. This is where you can set your position, so you can set up the scorecard. Next, you'll simply select your members, either by adding them directly. If there is a small set, you can just simply add them by typing in their names. Or again, you can add by searching, so maybe you want to pull all Republicans in the Senate. And again, if you've added those members to a project folder, you could just use the project folder as the source of the member information. In this case, I've selected Lamar Alexander, Doug Jones, and Bernie Sanders. Next, you'll click on Build Report. When the report outputs, you'll still have the ability to go back and change the data. That's the little Change Data link in the upper left. You're actually able to also rename this. We throw in the generic Vote Scorecard title. You'll be able to change that to whatever you wish. And then we've got a switch where you can view either a vote comparison report or simply put, the position report. Once you click Save to the upper right, we will redisplay the report where you can see here where I've highlighted the members and the percentage of the time they've voted according to your set positions. As you can see here, both Mr. Jones and Mr. Alexander voted positively, according to our position, on both bills for final passage, while Mr. Sanders voted negatively against both. From there, even though this report has been finished, you're still able to go back and edit the report. So maybe you want to add more votes to it or change the members, you can still do that. You'll be able to also share the report among other CQ users on your contract and save that scorecard under projects to find it again more easily. You won't have to remake this report, unlike the classic version of CQ where these reports weren't stored. Now they're stored, and every time you update them, add more bills to a project, for example, or different members, every time the report runs, it will update and display the latest information. From there, you'll be able to move this data out of CQ Federal and put it into a format or a screenshot for your use on your web pages. For example, you might capture this image, and if you're using Engage, which is our grassroots advocacy platform, you'd be able to display this vote card. But also, interestingly, within Engage, you also have your own ability to set up individual scorecards by member. Just a thought, and if you have additional questions, and we'll be able to field those.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. So I have lots of questions for all of you, but let's start maybe with you, Alex. You showed us a very sophisticated scorecard. Tell us kind of how big is your team? What's your kind of timeline, maybe for folks who are listening who might want a scorecard for the midterms? How far down how far out should you be starting something like that? Maybe not even as sophisticated as a one as yours.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like I said, we've been doing this for 40-something years, and so I think at this point we've got quite a process. But yeah, we've got a good advocacy team, about 5 people who are helping to kind of select the votes, write the vote description, sort of put together the scorecard. But then it's a really cross-departmental operation, right, where we've got our 3-person communication staff that's thinking through how we can promote the scorecard to traditional media. We've got our online team that's engaged to make sure we're putting things up on Facebook and emailing our members. We're certainly letting the Hill know about the scorecard, and so we're making sure that outreach is happening. Certainly our donor relations folks are engaged too, to make sure that our donors are aware of this. And so I think I would guess it's a sort of multi-month kind of process to put it together, but it's well worth it for sure.
And Josh, at AMA, kind of what was your timeline like for something like that?
So we would refresh it, every 2 weeks. Once we had the first build out of it, it was something that when I had got on board, there was a lapse. It wasn't being done, and then it became a priority. And then we were able to come up with a system and, really put the pieces together fairly quickly, work with your design team to, how's this actually going to look, and how is it going to be useful? So, did some digging to find how, translators, how to process this. Online, we found some free tools that you can actually take the data from CQ, translate it, and then it comes out into a spreadsheet that's usable that we can upload into a design template.
So, question: do co-sponsorships get weighted into the scorecard, or is it just votes? I presume that's for you, Alex.
Yeah. I think on rare occasions for some really high priority issues, we've decided to score co-sponsors, but I think on the whole, we much prefer to focus on actions that every single member of Congress, but the question has been called for them, and so that's why we almost exclusively focus on floor votes.
Another question: if a legislator will be receiving a negative score, at least a score that's not as good as it has been in the past, do you give their offices a heads up?
Yes, I mean, I think Josh got to some of this relationship management with members of Congress, and so we're definitely very careful when we're looking at the votes and knowing, is a member of Congress going to be particularly disappointed by their score? We'll want to try to give them a little bit of a heads up. If somebody's going to be particularly happy about it, we may want to give them a heads up. They may want to promote it. Yeah, we're thinking through, and I think that's actually probably part of the planning process, is making sure that you're thinking strategically about that outreach ahead of time, and you don't want to surprise people.
And with those individual offices that you've been working with on a regular basis, reaching out to the issue area staff and letting them know, because they might, in those scenarios where it's 50-50, they could be sponsoring your legislation here, but still not supportive on a lot of the other stuff. So you need to make sure that is intact, and that's where it becomes very tricky. So I would alert the issue area staff, and they might have a communication strategy, or they might call you in to start discussing those things. Because if your scorecard's been around for a number of years and you have a quality reputation, they care about that, and their office may want to engage with you and try to improve that score so that it doesn't become problematic, where you see some of those ads. Those ones, if you're receiving a 0% on that, I mean, they're going to figure it out. They're not going to be happy. I personally wouldn't send to that office to like heads up here, because like they probably not wanted to engage with your organization from the onset. Yeah. I don't know if that has been the case sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's oftentimes folks who get good scores who are the most invested in their scores, and the ones who are just on the opposite side on issues you tend to have very little engagement with them anyway, and so they're a little less bothered by the score. It's the people who feel like they were dinged for something, or they feel like a champion, and it's not being reflected in the scorecard. I mean, we always like to say we're just calling the balls and strikes, and yeah, this year you went down. But in some ways, it's not a perfect tool. There's no way to perfectly hold a member of Congress accountable, and they will say to us, look, yeah, we get that we weren't with you on those votes, but man, I was co-sponsoring this bill. I gave this filibuster on the floor. I'm leading these letters. I'm doing all of this stuff, and that's not reflected in your scorecard. And all we can say is that's not the methodology of the scorecard. And we're just focusing on the balls and strikes, but we recognize that there's a broader body of work that your boss is doing.
And there's other ways outside of the scorecard that you can thank those members too. So as you mentioned, it's a great tool. It's not a perfect tool, and you're going to come into those scenarios where you do have some people working hard on certain parts of your issues. When you cover such a wide spectrum of issue areas, that's going to be very challenging. So, sending out a tweet thanking them for their sponsorship or introducing legislation on something else, you can do that, without the scorecard, but still retain a quality scorecard that has a reputation that's objective and transparent and frequently updated.
Mm-hmm. Do you divide by state issues at all? So if someone has maybe a bad overall score, they can show, well, in Michigan, where I'm from, I scored, better.
Yeah. I mean, I think we tend to do sort of state-by-state releases, and so, they're going to be judged in comparison with their fellow delegation members, and that can give them some comfort or not, depending on the member.
Right. I think it's nice that you do kind of a lifetime score, too. At least that gives some hope for picking up the percentage somewhere along the way.
That's right.
Okay, one more question. We're a small NGO and track only positive actions, votes, co-sponsorship, signing appropriation support letters, etc. We only use our tracking internally to monitor legislators to inform our advocates about their targets. Though we do also give a 1 to 5 rating about how hard to try. While this is done by hand, any comments on doing it this way?
Very challenging, time consuming. I mean, I think that, having the tools, with the Motorcyclist Association, having the CQ platform to spit out that data made it easier. I think that, can it be done? Yes, but, it's one of those things where there's a small margin of error for return on investment, because you have to invest so much staff time into it. Yes, there's an expense associated with having a product, but on this side of things, personally, I think it outweighs the cost of it, because that the staff of having to go and do the rating system, and then if you're called into one of those scenarios where you have to look back, and you're going to have to go back and look through your manual records, and that stuff, you can easily make mistakes, and there's a low margin of error with that. So like if a member of Congress sees a low score and it's a hand-done error, your organization looks bad, even if you correct it, but that's a big mistake. So like having it systemized, having a back end that has the information there, you're less likely to have those errors and those problems.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, as lobbyists on individual issues, like we will do these kinds of target charts and track things kind of as best as we can. I think when you're talking about kind of a public-facing product like a scorecard, I think it's definitely very helpful to be using like a service like CQ.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, maybe there's an argument if you're a small state-based organization where you just have to watch what both senators are doing or something, you know. But
yeah, that and some like local groups. I know that local grassroots groups might be looking at city council or county council. In that sense, I think that it can be done. But if you're doing at the federal level, I strongly recommend having a service.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. As I said, look out for the email with a link to the recording, and we will see you next time. Thank you.